Hiya folks, and welcome back to the show. Now, if you haven't unlocked the granite worktop achievement yet, then you might still be fitting laminate worktops. Chipboard laminate worktops do still have their place. At the end of the day, this stuff is 10 to 20 times cheaper than granite. So sometimes the budget just doesn't stretch to granite, and in this situation, unfortunately, it doesn't. So we're just going for laminate. And it's fine. Laminate worktops are fine. It's just you need to be a little bit careful, you know, use pan protectors and things, because it is basically a plastic finish on the top. Anyway, when you're fitting this, you need to put some sort of edge banding down these edges. You can get like screw-on metal banding and things, but it doesn't look as good. The matched banding always generally looks a little bit better. So we're going to do this edge here. First thing that I'm going to do is just sand down this underside, because from the cut we've got a few little scrappy bits there, and I'm just going to give it a gentle sand down on that corner. Just to make sure there's no like flaky bits that are going to come off and stop the glue from sticking. And it's also worth mentioning as well that I have treated these ends with yacht varnish. Now, I have no idea, I haven't done a long-term test on yacht varnish versus no yacht varnish, but I just prefer it just to seal the grain of the worktop, because these are your vulnerable points. If water gets into this, the worktop will swell and basically your worktop's trashed. So I do prefer to treat every single cut edge with yacht varnish just to kind of seal things up. If you are going to go down that route, make sure it's completely dry before you apply the edge banding. But as I say, this is just my approach. I don't know if it's good or bad to put yacht varnish on. It's up to you if you want to do that. Anyway, let me show you what tools we're going to be using today. We have got the all-important impact adhesive. This should be more than enough to do probably 5 to 10 edges, so you don't need a lot of impact adhesive. Obviously, I've got the edge banding. Here is what it looks like. We've got a seam roller, a rigid type of seam roller, not the spongy type. We've got a Stanley knife, very sharp Stanley knife blade. Make sure that they're brand new blades that you're using. We've got an old brush for applying the impact adhesive. I've got some sandpaper on a nice flat back, so I've just got it on that. But yeah, this is just 100 grit sandpaper that I've got there. Some nice sharp scissors, some frog tape, a wire brush, a bog standard file. So if you're not familiar with files, they come in various shapes and sizes and flavors. One edge is smooth, one edge is serrated, and then obviously the top and bottom are serrated as well. And I've just got a piece of tape over the top there, because sometimes when you're holding it like that, the sharp corners of the file can dig into your hand after a while and give you blisters. That's why I've got tape on the top of the file. And you might need a tape measure. So I've got a tape measure, and I've just got a screwdriver for opening the pot of impact adhesive. And by the way, don't mess on with old tubs of impact adhesive. Get yourself a brand new tub, because it should flow really easily. And if you don't use new impact adhesive, you're going to have all sorts of problems applying it. And the first thing that we're going to do is just brush it on all the way. Make sure it goes all the way at the edge. What I like to do is kind of brush it upwards towards the edge like that, because if you miss any bits, the edge banding obviously ain't going to stick. So it's absolutely critical that it goes all the way at the edge. Try not to get it onto the surface of the worktop, but it's more important to make sure that the edges are covered. So I'm just doing this top edge first of all, because that's the most critical edge, if you like. You can use the spray stuff. I'm personally not a fan of the spray stuff, because it just goes everywhere. There's also the risk with the spray stuff that you could end up with like little voids where the impact adhesive hasn't filled up a little gap, and then if moisture gets down that gap, then your worktop's had it. That is the thing with these worktops. I mean, a length of this worktop is 130 quid versus what, a grand to a couple of grand for granite. So yeah, price wise, man, it's so much cheaper going down the laminate route. But the trade-off is that it's nowhere near as hard wearing. And if you aren't careful, and if any moisture gets down these edges at all, and it seeps into that chipboard, the chipboard swells up, and that's your worktop's basically shot at that point. So there we go, that's done. Nice even coat all the way along, all the edges completely covered. Try to make sure it's not applied too thickly, otherwise it'll never dry. If you kind of look at an angle, you should be able to see that you've got good coverage. That looks good to me. That needs to sit for about 10 to 20 minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to put the glue on the edge banding. So I'll show you a little tip here. So the edge banding comes on a roll like this normally. And we'll just take the sellotape off. You'll find that it's like, it just got a habit of just coiling up on itself. So I'm just going to roughly cut this to size. So we're going about there. So it cuts with scissors quite easily. And maybe do this a little bit in advance. What I like to do is just coil it in the other direction. Like that. Pop a bit of tape on and just leave it like that for a little bit, and it just means that when you come to apply the glue on this, it's more inclined to kind of sit flat. So I'm just going to leave that like that for now, and in the meantime here's the other bit that I cut before, and I'm just going to apply the impact adhesive onto that. So I'm going to try and do it all in one go. Try not to let it get onto the front of the edge banding, and try not to get lumps in it. This is because this brush is getting a little bit old. If there's any like big lumps, try and take them out. That should be fine. And this is strong stuff, by the way, so make sure that you're in a well ventilated area. Don't breathe it in. And again, it's absolutely critical that there's no dry patches. Every little bit of banding needs to be covered. So we're just going to leave that now. Again, it needs to sit for about, it says 20 minutes on the tin, but obviously it depends on weather conditions and things like that. But basically we're waiting on that to become more or less touch dry, and same on the worktop end as well. At the minute it is, well, say 10 past 1, so around 1:30 I need to be applying this, and just periodically go over and check, you know, that's still really tacky. It should feel touch dry before you attempt to stick the two surfaces together. And by the way, I'm sure I'll mention this a few times, this is a one-shot hit you've got on this. Once that touches that, it ain't going to come apart. So if you get the alignment wrong, you're stuffed. And while we're waiting on this to go off, it's worth having a read of all the instructions on the impact adhesive that you're using, because depending on the brand that you use, it might be used in a very slightly different way. This is the Evo Stick stuff. I always find that works pretty well, but as I say, it comes in various flavors. But the whole idea of impact adhesive is that you put it on both surfaces, you let it go pretty much dry, and then as soon as those surfaces touch each other, they just bond together forever. And it's a really, really strong glue, especially for this kind of application. And by the way, once you're done, your paintbrush can go in the bin. There's no salvaging that. There's nothing that'll get that back to normal. So just make sure you're using like a cheap paintbrush. It does come with an applicator, like this kind of applicator thing, but I find a paintbrush is easier. But again, try both, see what you find works best. But that can go in the bin now. So it is now 26 minutes past 1. It's close enough, but this feels completely dry to the touch now on that side, and on the edge banding, more or less completely dry to the touch. So I'm happy to go ahead with that. Don't rush it though, you know, you're better leaving it a little bit longer than not. So get your alignment right. I'm just going to leave a bit of an overlap on all sides. There's various schools of thought to this. I'm going to leave a bigger gap at the bottom than at the top. I'll tell you why in a second, but we just want nice overlap all the way along. And then I'm just getting my seam roller and I'll just do a quick go over. I'm really putting some extra pressure on the edges. Be careful at your ends so that you don't go flying off and break the edge banding. That can happen quite easily. But we want really, really good adhesion, especially on the edges, because again, that's where moisture can get in and damage the worktop. That is grand. If you tap it, there should be no like hollow points or anything. It should feel totally solid all the way along. Cool. So then I'm just going to take some scissors and trim off as much of the excess as I can, just on the two edges. You don't need to be completely flush to the edge. Then the first edges I'm going to tackle are the front edge and the back edge, because I don't want to catch this on anything when I'm working on the worktop. And all I'm doing, gently-ish, at this stage, because we're quite far away from the edge, I can put a little bit more pressure on. But as we get closer and closer, we want to make sure that we just ease off on the pressure, because if you go too far, you've destroyed your worktop. Now, this is a stage where a very sharp Stanley knife blade can help, because sometimes it gets a little bit tricky to see what you've done and what you haven't done. So just very gently take a little bit of that out. Oh, and you need like a cloth, a dry, like a bandana or something is great. Probably enough to get the blade up there. Just a little bit more. And the file. And the file only works in one direction. Don't be rubbing it backwards and forwards. I've just got my finger firmly on there. You can use two hands, but I'm using one hand to steady the worktop. I'm just going to do this left-hand edge, or the back edge. A little bit tricky because the camera's in the road. What you don't want to do is come in from the back and work that way. You've got to be working that way. If you have to work from this direction, what you're going to have to do is turn the file around and come in like that. So it can be done, but never work like in that direction, because you'll pull the banding away. It doesn't get full strength on the adhesive until about 24 hours after you've fitted it. So just bear that in mind. Go easy. And what you can do, this is quite a big overhang, so what you can do is just take a sharp Stanley knife and try and get the majority of the material off. Depending on how strong your fingers are. And you're always working at 45 degrees, by the way, or roughly 45 degrees. You don't need to like measure it. There we go. That's fine for that back edge. Cool. Right, I'm going to work on the underside first. So that I don't damage our lovely new worktop, I'm just going to pop some cardboard underneath. Flip it the other way around. If your worktop's too big or too cumbersome, or you just can't turn it upside down, then what I would suggest is that you align the bottom edge pretty much flush, because it'll be much easier then to just basically run a bit of sandpaper over the bottom edge. The bottom edge is obviously a little bit less critical because you don't see it as much. But in this situation, it's easy enough to flip the worktop over. And now I can trim this down a bit. So to do this, you need strong fingers. You can get laminate trimmers. I've never used them, but I just prefer to use a sharp Stanley knife blade. But usual rules apply. Do not take too much off. So I'm looking to go almost flush, like just shy of being flush to the surface of the underside of the worktop. Right, that's the majority of it off, probably down to about 0.5 millimetre or something. So now I'm just going to take my sanding block and take that down at 45 degrees all the way. I'm stopping just shy of the front edge because I'm going to do that with a file. You just don't have that kind of finesse with a sanding block. Remember, we're not rounding it, we're just doing 45. That's great. You can go along with a Stanley knife on top, and just if there's any like rogue bits of glue sticking up or anything, but actually that's pretty good. Right, this front edge is a bit more critical, so I'm going to be using the file on that. And again, just gan canny. If you take too much off, you can't put it back on. So keep just checking and double checking, especially if you've never done this before. That's pretty good. I'm happy with that. Right, top edge. So, on the basis that we've managed to keep this only just proud of the surface, we can probably do all of this with a file. But if you've left too much of it up, you're going to have to trim it off in some sort of way, otherwise you'll be there for an ever and a day. You need to be really careful not to dig into the top surface of the worktop when you're doing that. But you can, like, just, again, very carefully with a Stanley knife, take a little bit out. And there's a few schools of thought on this, by the way. Some people cut it closer to the right size before fitting it, like cut it with scissors to the right size. The only risk there is that if there's any bits of the banding that are likely not to have enough glue on, it's the edges of the banding. So there is a slight risk that you might not get enough glue on those bits. Anyway, I can do all of this with a file. So all I'm going to do is just come down to the level of the worktop, and I'm working along at 45 degrees. I'm just getting the bulk off at the minute. I'm not going for like my final finish, but at the point that you think you're getting close, just stop, double check. What I'll do, I'll try and do this bit perfectly. He says, I'll try and do this bit and show you what I'm going to do all the way along. So I'm just taking it to the point that you see you're getting this kind of flappy bit left. And you're just starting to see a tiny, tiny white line across here. That means stop. At the point you start seeing that you've broken all the way through, you've almost gone too far. You want it just to be that kind of flappy bit like that. Right, now just take our Stanley knife blade and very, very gently, look at this. I'm putting almost no pressure on this, just to get that little flappy edge off. But be really careful that you don't dig it into the surface of your worktop. If you feel like it's digging in, maybe just do a bit more filing. See here, it's a little bit proud there. Tiny bit more filing. Time scales for a job like this takes me about half an hour per edge. And that doesn't include the time waiting on the glue to dry, by the way. That's pretty good. You can just take your nail and just check. You see here, very slightly raised there. There we go. So that's what I'm aiming for all the way around. At this point, can you just see here, there's a slight bit of white showing through, a tiny bit of white edge. That means I've gone a tiny bit too far. Microscopic distances, just to get it absolutely perfect. But yeah, just go easy. You can always go over it again, but just don't take too much off. But I'm pretty happy with that. I need to do that all the way along. Nay, bad. I'm quite happy with that. It's not my best one, but it's okay. I would give myself 8 out of 10 for that. Tiny bit of glue. Glue there. Yeah, that's cool. Done. That's about as perfect as I can get it. That's what I'm shooting for generally. If you can get it better than that, then well done. But there you go. That's just my approach to it anyway. I'm not a master of it. I've done it a fair bit over the last, 25 years of doing renovations and things, but I'm not a professional kitchen fitter. I don't do this every day. Kitchen fitters would be so much quicker than me at doing something like this, and they would probably do a much better job as well. But that's about as good as I can get it. It's quite DIY-able, just don't rush. And remember, as I've said many times, don't take too much off, just gan canny, because you can always file a little bit more away, but if you take too much off, you can't put it back on. As per usual, if you've got any extra comments, suggestions, tips, or anything like that, please post them down in the comments below, because we learn from each other so much on this channel. Don't forget to hit subscribe for more kind of videos along the lines of this, and all sorts of other things to do with the world of property maintenance. Folks, for now, as per usual, look after one another, be nice to each other. We shall see you next time. Tatty bye.